Our next speaker, Michael Mercier, most of you know him as he produces most of our classes. But in addition, he is president of Screen Education, which addresses issues at the intersection of digital technology and human well-being, including smartphone addiction, news media bias, and artificial intelligence through research, seminars, and consulting. Reflecting his passion for learning, Michael's first major splurge after starting his career was a used set of World Book encyclopedias. He then spent a decade as an editor and publisher in the college textbook industry and another decade in market research. He holds a BA in psychology from Vassar College, an MBA in marketing from the University of Michigan, and an MS in MIS from the University of Cincinnati. Michael.
Jerry, can you adjust the volume on the speaker? Check, 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 check. Is it up? Check, check. Check, check. So this subject is really complicated, and I spent a lot of time over the summer. I started working on this summer, trying to understand how chatbots work. So, pardon me if I've tried to, given everything I've learned, I'm trying to present it in a really conceptual way, but I could fail in a couple of points. So, excuse me if I do. So the title of the talk is How to Teach Yourself Anything Using AI Chatbots. And as Betty said, I've been an autodidact my entire life. I've always, been hungry to teach myself new things. And of course, everyone that goes to Empower You is into learning, right? But I had an experience during COVID where I spent about 35 hours studying. Studying how mRNA vaccines work. And this was before chatbots. And it's something I just had to understand for personal reasons, right? And I was sort of shocked. I would talk to other people, like everyone, about do you know how mRNA vaccines work? And nobody knew, and nobody seemed to be interested in it. And I started to think, well, maybe some people just don't tackle certain topics because they're too difficult, even if it's important. But I realized once I discovered chatbots, I felt that I could have cut that 35 hours, and I'm not kidding, probably down to like 20. The chatbots are so effective at teaching you things. It blew my mind. So I put together a talk that synthesizes sort of learning theory and chatbots. So I'm going to start off talking about learning, like how we learn, what's the learning process. Then I'm going to get into AI chatbots and how they work, and how to use them optimally. And then at the end, I'm going to synthesize the two. And for every step in the learning process, just talk about how you can use AI chatbots. So starting with learning. So just a working definition of learning. The way I think about this is at any moment, you can think of us as having a base of knowledge, a static base of knowledge in our minds. And learning is simply integrating new knowledge into that current base of knowledge. So it's this process of integration of new knowledge. And the learning process, I've broken it down into these 3 steps. So the first step, when you learn, you have to have a goal. So something you want to learn, you want to understand. Then you have to gather information, vet the information. So by vetting, I mean decide what's valid information, what's not valid, but also decide what's relevant to your learning project and what do you want to leave behind or discard. Then you have to this is where the big work comes in. You have to struggle to understand the subject. Then you put it into a structure. You structure it and then you go through that integration step. And I want to show you something. Using this framework, I feel that this illustrates the power of self-directed learning, of teaching yourself new things. So I want to show you. So if we think about these steps, the question I'm asking here is, which steps does the student perform, the learner perform, when they're taking a class that someone else is teaching or someone else is guiding their learning? And it's really just two of those steps, because the teacher is setting the goal, the teacher is gathering the information for you, doing all the vetting. The teacher really, is structuring the course. And what we're left to do is just understand the topics and integrate them, right? And by contrast, when we teach ourselves, we're doing every one of those steps, right? So my point is, there's a tremendous power in teaching yourself things, because you have to do all these other steps and you learn so much more, you learn at a deeper level, and you retain more. So that's part of my point here. Part of my point here is I almost feel like I'm an evangelist. I feel like especially with chatbots, like anyone could teach themselves anything with these chatbots, because it's like having a tutor that's an expert on any subject. So we accelerate learning. But I want to make the point. A lot of people say, well, if you use a chatbot, it's giving you information and you're not learning anything. So that could be true. But you have to use the chatbot in the right way. So you have to go into this process thinking, I'm going to use the chatbot to help me do certain things, but I have to extract the information from the chatbot. I have to own the information. I have to manipulate it. I have to work with it. So this is not a passive process. I think of the chatbot almost as a colleague who's working with you on a project that you're both working on. That's how I use a chatbot. So now I just want to go through each of these steps just in a little more depth. So the terms of the goal, one of the reasons there's tremendous power in you setting the goal is that your motivation is intrinsic. You want to understand something for personal reasons, so you're highly motivated. Whereas with in a classroom, the goal is really being given to you. So you have almost like personal, practical reasons to learn something. And it has often immediate application for you. And you can customize, you're basically customizing the goal so it meets your needs perfectly. So in a way, the goal becomes like a North Star. It becomes like the benchmark you use throughout the learning process to decide if whatever you're doing at any given moment, you have to decide whether it's contributing to your goal of learning about this subject. And of course, I suggest you write down your goal and be as specific as possible. In terms of gathering information, the gathering stage is like an exploratory stage. That's how I view it. And I just maintain an open attitude and look at almost everything I can and see if it's relevant. It helps if you use multiple modalities. So like when I was doing my research on mRNA vaccines, I used Wikipedia, but I spent a lot of time on short videos on YouTube. So I might watch like 5 to 8 videos on the same topic on YouTube and reconcile the differences and take a lot from that. Then I'd go read the Wikipedia article, and then I'd do a search online and find other articles, right? So multimodality really helps you understand a subject if you access the information from different sources or different modes like sound, reading, video. And again, you have to write and type the information. You really have to work with the information. In terms of vetting, as I mentioned before, you're really just assessing the validity of the information. So that takes judgment. You have to go to primary sources when you have to if you don't trust something. A lot of it is guesswork, in a lot of cases. But I find for most subjects, they're not political, and there's often not that much of a bias, so it's not a big deal, But if you get into political issues, you have to do a lot of vetting and really figure out if the information is valid. But the real point here about vetting information is to make sure it's relevant to your topic. So you're going to find when you go out and explore and try to gather information, you're going to find a lot of things that really just aren't relevant, and you discard them and keep what's really just directly relevant to your goal. This is where the big work comes in. So once you understand what your major topics are, you're not going to completely understand them. Then you have to, that's when you dive in really deeply, and you'll see that this is where the chatbots really are extremely helpful in helping you understand things, because they literally are like tutors. They're like expert tutors on every subject. They're accessible 24/7, and they can speak to you at any level you're at, any intellectual level you're at. So this is where a lot of the work is doing. This is where a lot of the learning is, when you're pushing yourself to try to understand each issue, and you're going to be doing more research and cross-checking things. The other thing I want to explain is, like when I study the mRNA vaccines, there are different. If you don't be intimidated if you're looking at a technical subject. Like I actually, as a young person, I did not enjoy science. I found it boring. But suddenly, when I had this strong motivation, it seemed interesting. But I knew I wasn't going to get to the level of like an MD, right, and understanding certain subjects, medical subjects. But what I did was I approached it and tried to learn it from a more conceptual level, right? And you can do that with many subjects, including technology. Or a subject like finance. I used to work in the textbook industry in finance, right? So I would learn financial principles at a conceptual level. I wouldn't learn how to do the calculations, put it that way. So you're gathering information from multiple sources, synthesizing the information, identifying subtopics that you don't understand. You do further research. And then it really helps if you can test your knowledge. This is going to be where the chatbots really come in handy. What I did when I studied the mRNA vaccines, I would spend a lot of time studying a topic, and then I'd feel like I really have to test my understanding of this. And I was fortunate. I fell into it was a group of about probably 300-400 MDs and PhDs worldwide on LinkedIn who were talking about the vaccines on LinkedIn. And I fell into this group, and I would go on the chats they were having and say, look, I've been studying this. This is my understanding. Is this correct? And they could say yes or no, or refine my understanding of it. Now, when you do self-directed learning, you're often not going to have an expert, right? And that's where the chatbots come in. They can be tremendously helpful at that stage to test your understanding. In terms of structuring information, one of the reasons we want to structure information is the brain organizes knowledge in structures. So you can use different words for what it's doing. It's creating schemas or patterns or relationships, structures, constructs, models, frameworks, right? But the brain absorbs information and it likes to have it in a structure, a meaningful structure. That's one of the big benefits of structuring information. That's why a textbook, for example, has a table of contents, right? We organize information in a way because we intuitively understand the brain wants it structured. So this is a big step, the structuring of the information. And we're just talking about an outline, almost like a textbook outline, with a major section, a subsection, and then the detail. And this is a personal note. I'm actually, just because of the way my mind works, I can't get into details until I understand the big picture. So I just wanted to share this because it might help people if you take on a learning project. What I do is I start off by working out the meta structure of a topic I'm studying. If I'm teaching myself something, I basically use the outline as my guide. It's like my mental center as I'm learning. And my goal is constantly, anything I learn, if I do research, I gather a piece of information, I'm constantly going back to my outline that I'm keeping on paper or in Word and revising and integrating it into the outline. And I find that for me, that's critical. It helped me learn a lot faster. And then at the end of the process, I find it's because I already have this structure in place and I've already worked with the information so much, revising the outline, it's easy to internalize it. So that's just a personal, other people might not feel that way or might not work that way, but I've found it to be tremendously helpful. The other thing I do is I try to make the outline tell a story. That's another way to help you sort of grasp it. If your meta outline tells the story of the topic that you're studying, that can be very helpful too. And I want to say, I did have a slide that showed all the learning theory that backed this up, but it was too much. So, but if you look at all the learning theory about learning and self-directed learning, everything in here backs up like the benefits of the things I'm talking about in terms of learning quickly and deeply. Yeah, just my tip is, if you use the outline as the mental center of the learning project throughout, it makes that final integration stage really easy. And then the final stage, the integration of the information, right? Learning, going back to my definition, learning is integrating new knowledge into your existing knowledge base, right? And by this stage, we've organized the new knowledge we're going to learn into a structure, and we just have to internalize it. And the way that we internalize it is you think of the brain being comprised of all this knowledge, and it's organized in all these structures, right? And a lot of them, they overlap. It's like a matrix, right? And the easiest way to integrate something is to think about what node or structure that's already in your mind does this new thing most relate to? And that's the point of integration. And I'll illustrate this point. So I want to go back to vaccines. Before we learned about mRNA vaccines, right? I understood at this basic level how a vaccine worked, right? So how do vaccines work? They grow the virus, they kill the virus, they inject the dead virus in your bloodstream, your immune system responds, and you develop the antibodies, right? Well, this structure, right, has to be revised now because that was what a vaccine was, but now we have two categories of vaccines. We have mRNA vaccines, which work differently, right? So here's an example of how, in my mind, I integrated my understanding of mRNA vaccines into my current understanding. I basically created a fork. And so this is literally what I was doing. So, how do vaccines work? Well, it depends on the type of vaccine. Is it a traditional dead antigen vaccine or an mRNA vaccine? And I literally went through a process to sort of solidify that structure in my mind. So that's really what we're talking about. That's how you integrate something. And think about this. If you're teaching yourself something, you have, as I mentioned, you have this intrinsic motivation, this strong intrinsic motivation. You're doing it for a personal reason, right? So it's only going to make sense that it's connected to something within your mind, right? In other words, it's going to be easy for you to find a way to integrate it. It's going to be because your goal in learning is a natural extension of what you already know and what you need to know, right? And I also, I wanted to share this too. This might be helpful to people. The way that I integrate is I have this complex outline, and the way that I do a lot of it is really already internalized, right? But for this final step, what I do is my task is to write the outline completely over and over and over again. So I keep trying, and I fail, and I see where I missed and what I can't get, and I write it again. And I do this over a few days, right? But I keep trying to get to the point where I can write the entire outline from memory. And when I get to that point and I wait 3 days and I can still write, I don't forget it, that's when I know I've internalized it. And I find it's a really helpful way to do it. The other thing I want to mention is, if you look at learning theory, there's this whole idea of we learn information in chunks. So what I do is, when I sort of get to this internalization phase, is I first internalize the major headings of my outline. Once I've internalized that, then it's really easy. The details just fall into place, right? So that's another tip. The other thing I want to tell you is, when I talked about like my method of going through writing the outline over and over again, right? You struggle and you struggle. When you sleep, it actually solidifies in your mind. So I always keep in mind, when I'm struggling with writing the outline, the benefit's going to come the next day. I know that. So I just keep pushing and failing and pushing and failing. And then the next day, most of it's solidified and it becomes pretty easy. So, okay. So now I want to move on to chatbots. So what is a chatbot? Has anyone heard the term LLM, or large language model? You familiar with that? Yeah. So a chatbot is basically an interface that a user uses to communicate with the large language model. So the real value that's being delivered through the chatbot, it comes from the large language model. So that you can think of the chatbot as software that's connecting you to the large language model. So you're typing in your query, you're giving it to the chatbot, and it's submitting it to the large language model. The large language model responds, and then the chatbot displays the response to you. That's really what it is. The other thing that some people get confused about is this is the corporate ecosystem. So on the left, There are some companies that just make large language models. And then you see in the middle, there are some that make large language models and chatbots. So OpenAI is an example. They make ChatGPT and they use their own large language model. And then on the right, there are companies that just make chatbots and they license the large language models from other companies. So that might just clear up some confusion if anyone was confused about hearing people talk about these different companies and what they offer. So at this point, I was going to go live on the internet and show you ChatGPT, but we had trouble setting up. Their network was blocking ChatGPT, so I can't do that. But I had some old screenshots. What happened here? Okay, I guess I don't have the screenshots. So the bottom line is, this is what I want to tell you in terms of the chatbot. I don't know how familiar people are, but I wanted to make a couple of things clear because it really helps you when you're learning things. There are 3 types of chats you can have in ChatGPT. There's something called a temporary chat, and in the upper right corner, I was going to show you this, but the upper right corner, you turn on a temporary chat. The temporary chat is just if you want to ask it a quick question and you don't want to save the chat, so it'll delete that chat when you're done. Right? And after 6 hours, it just times out and everything you've chatted about is lost. So there are temporary chats that aren't remembered. Then if you just open up ChatGPT and start chatting, that's called like a saved chat. So it'll name that chat and save it in a file menu on the left side, right? That is just a long continuous chat. And you could go back 3 months, open up that chat and continue chatting with it, but it's just gonna be a long continuous chat. ChatGPT and some of the other chatbots, they have a feature that's really helpful for people doing projects, and it's called, I think, a project chat. And you can see that on the left-hand column, and I was going to show you, I have like all these projects. And what it basically does is it lets you name your project. So if it's a learning project, you name whatever it is, History of Israel, for example. And then you can start, it'll save multiple chats. So the bottom line is you can start, if you want to start a new chat, so say with, COVID mRNA vaccines, I want to have just a chat about viruses. I could have a virus chat and I'll ask all my questions about viruses under that chat and it'll save it. If I want to go back and look at what I learned about viruses, it's all saved under viruses. I could start another chat about immunology and focus just on that. And by the time, over time, in some of my chats, my project chats, I have probably 10, 15 topics under that chat. So if you're going to use ChatGPT, it's a really powerful feature to use if you're trying to learn something. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're in a chat, it gives you a way. ChatGPT has something called a canvas, and basically it'll create it's almost like a Word document within your chat, and you can collaborate with ChatGPT on this Word document. So, for example, you've been having a long chat with GPT, and you've come to some conclusions about something, and you want to pull that information out and separate it and download it. You can say to ChatGPT, "Hey, could you pull this information we just together, put it in a canvas?" And then you can actually edit it together. You could ask it, can you revise it this way? Can you add this to it? Can you go look up this and add it? And then you can download that as a document. So there's some versatility for people who are doing this sort of project work, and it's real beneficial for learning projects. So, I want to explain something about these large language models. They're a mystery to people. And here's why I think this is important. You've probably heard a lot about people anthropomorphizing these chatbots. They start to feel like it's a person and it's conscious and it understands them, right? And it's really not. It's a machine. But I felt that way. I felt that way when I first started using it. And once I started studying chatbots, I was eventually, I became disillusioned, right? And I now view it just as a machine. But before, I really felt like I was talking to a person that understood me. So I want to explain a little bit about this so people don't this is becoming a big problem. Apparently, I've been reading a lot of articles and hearing stories about this. That especially young people, they're getting involved with these chatbots, and they feel like it's a person that knows them, that's a friend. So it's neither thinking nor conscious. It's just functioning as a machine. And what it's really doing is it's storing, for every word that exists in our language, it's storing probability. So it's doing all this study up front, and it's for every word, right? It's assigning probabilities to that word. And I'll give you an example, like the word bank, right? Bank could be used to name a financial institution, or it could be like a river bank, the bank of a river, right? So there's an example of a word having different contexts, right? And if you look at all the words we know, there can be multiple really complex subtle variations in the context. The large language model is doing is this, for every word it's analyzing, it's looking at hundreds of billions to trillions of words, and it's continuously analyzing them, and it's developing probabilities that it's assigning to those words. Those probabilities basically say, in this context, if these other words are used with the word bank, fish, river, summer, water, right? Fishing line, hook. If those words are used in relation in the context, if the word bank is used in that context, it's likely talking about a riverbank. Okay, so that's what it's doing. It's generating these probabilities, and then when you submit a query, it's analyzing the context, and given the context, the other words that are being used in your query, it's saying, okay, this is the context. Let me pull out the statistics I have for that context, and what it's doing is it's calculating the likelihood of the next word. So it's literally word for word. When you get a response back from a chatbot, it's literally every word. It's starting its response. It's calculating what's the likely next word. Okay, now what's the likely next word? Okay, what's the likely next word? That's how it's working. And ChatGPT, when I was struggling with understanding this, it actually gave me this analogy. It said, well, it's like a large language model is like autocomplete on steroids. And that crystallized it for me. So if you think about your phone, right? If you're typing a text message to someone, you start to type a word, and what it's doing is at a very simple level, it's looking at what you've been talking about, and then it's looking at the first letter you start, and it's suggesting like 3 words, right? And those are based on probabilities. It's looking at the context of your conversation with the person, what you just said in this new message, and it's saying, well, 30% chance it's this word he's typing, 50% chance it's this word, and 80% chance it's this word, right? That's literally, right? It's dumb. It doesn't know what it's doing. It's just statistics. That's what a large language model is doing on a massive scale, a complex scale. So that, when I heard that metaphor, that shattered it all for me. I'm like, okay, I get it. It's a really great metaphor for what it's doing. It's just a machine. Yeah.
Where does the bot or the large language model live? Does it live in your computer? Does it live in the cloud? Does it live in some, I don't know, in China? Where?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. And I want to say, I'm not presenting myself here as a tech expert. Okay. So I don't know. I assume it's on a server. What my understanding from what I've read is this is like for math nerds, but basically I mentioned it's storing probabilities for each word. It's actually a multi-dimensional vector for each word that goes up to 12,288 dimensions. So that's what it's storing for each word. And what I was told is it's basically like a file menu, word, and the whole set of the vectors, right? For that word with all those dimensions. I assume it's just saved on a server that the company that owns the large language model has.
I've got a couple questions from online here. Which chatbot do you recommend?
Well, again, I'm not presenting myself as an expert on all things chatbots. I'm really not. So all I can say is I've used ChatGPT. I've used the Microsoft Chat and Grok, which is Elon Musk's chatbot. for now, because I'm used to ChatGPT, that's the one I tend to use most. Sometimes I go to the other ones if I get frustrated with ChatGPT. So I recommend, but they're biased. Like I find they're all very biased politically. That's an issue, but you can argue with them, and sometimes you can win them over. Was there another one, Jerry?
Question, Mick. They're biased because that's the data they're trained on.
Right. So I'll go past this. Yeah. So just quickly, and I mentioned something about how they're trained, but yeah, it's really amazing. They're exposed to hundreds of billions to my understanding is that the current version of ChatGPT was trillions of words, right? And the way that they're trained is that they're gathering all this text. The chatbot, the LLM companies are gathering all this text, and you've probably heard there are copyright issues, right? Because they're using like published books and news articles online, and the owners of the copyrights of that information are saying this isn't right. You shouldn't be using this. You're making money off of our news article, off of our book, and this shouldn't be happening, right? They're taking information from journals, from social media, and they're just processing, just dumping, running all this stuff through the large language model to develop these statistics, these probability statistics. So they take the hundreds of billions to trillions of words, and they break it into what they call tokens. So if you ever heard the word token, the token, it's the unit, the smallest unit. So it could either be the word, a part of a word, and I read in some cases it's a character in a word, right? But they're breaking it down, and then they're training the large language model. So they're basically these trillions of words, they start feeding them a sentence into the model, and they'll feed the first word of a sentence, and it's an actual sentence, and it'll ask it to predict the next word. So it tries to predict the next word, and it likely fails, and it's corrected, and it starts to adjust its probabilities. And you can imagine if you keep doing that for trillions of words, eventually you're going to get really good at predicting the next word. You're going to keep refining, right, your algorithms and your probabilities for various contexts, and that's basically how they do it. Yeah, I mentioned there their coordinates in a vector. Basically, they have these vectors that go to 12,288 dimensions is for ChatGPT right now. So when we submit a query, it's breaking down our query into these tokens, so the chatbot, the LLM can understand it. It pulls up the vectors for that each token, and it figures out the correct context with all those vectors, and it starts to weight them differently, and then it calculates the next likely word that would come about given that history using the probability statistics. That's really what it's doing. It's like a machine. This is something else I want to mention. I came up with this term. I realized after using these chatbots to really in depth on multiple projects, right? I've worked with them a lot. And I started to notice when you really get into a project and spend a lot of time on it, it really starts to understand where you're coming from with that project, right? And I realized at some point it's mirroring your mind. It's like it gets into your head. It really understands what you're trying to do. And I'll give you an example. Over the summer when I was studying chatbots, right? I explained everything I said, look, I'm studying this for a presentation I want to put together. This is my goal with the presentation, And I would just, as we continued to chat back and forth over weeks and weeks, it really came to understand what I was doing. And it got to the point where it would say, it knew that I wanted to understand this stuff at a somewhat deeper level, yet I wanted to be able to explain it to the audience at a more conceptual level. So if we were chatting about a certain aspect of a chatbot, it would say, well, you're on the right track, but let me refine your thinking about this. This is what it really is. Here's some language you can use in your presentation for your audience, right? And if you want, I can put together a couple of slides. I mean, this is how refined it gets in terms of aligning with your mind. So I call that cognitive mirroring. Then I learned in AI, there's a term called alignment, like they want AI systems to align with the user, right? So I call it cognitive alignment. But my point is, you really don't start to reap the power and benefit of these these chatbots in terms of learning until you get to this stage of cognitive alignment and it really knows where you're coming from with the project. And it does that through memory. It saves long-term memories of that thing that learns about you. So it stores that. So it knows like some background about you. And then it has all the memory from this conversation. Sometimes it can cross-reference other conversations you've had about other topics outside the project, right? It really gets to know you and where you're coming from. And that's the point. It's tremendously beneficial if you can get to that point. And here's the real trick here. I do what I call accelerating to cognitive alignment. So the bottom line is, why wait a long time, right, for it to get to that point where it's really understanding you? So I try to accelerate to cognitive alignment by explaining everything up front about what I'm trying to understand and where I'm coming from, the level I want to understand that. So I can get to that point of cognitive alignment faster, you know? But in terms of learning, like, this is tremendously beneficial.
Question. I'm an absolute amateur. How do I get to ChatGPT? What do I do?
All you do is go to chatgpt.com.
Okay.
And
So put it in the URL. Just type in chatgpt.com.
And
Is there a fee for service? Or
they have a free version,
free version?
right?
Okay.
I pay for the $20 version a month, 20 a month. I've decided I might drop it because the new version has become so biased. It's unbelievable. And it's constantly lecturing you. But yeah, there's a real benefit I find to paying the $20. I'm getting a little tired of it now, but yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything that will show us the process, how to start, how to decide whatever topic?
I was going to show that live, but we couldn't. The network is blocking us from ChatGPT.
Technology.
Because they're high school kids, and they said they're not allowed. You have to be 18 to use it or something. So,
technology.
But basically, when you get to ChatGPT.com, it's going to be intuitive. There's a box in the center where you type in your question, and it'll start to reply.
Question? Just a comment. If you want a non-biased one that's more Christian-based, it's called Gab AI.
Okay.
You can go to that website and you'll find it's trained on Christian values.
Wow.
Which is way different from all the other Chat GPTs.
Yeah.
So be willing to check that out. It's pretty good, decent, and it's clean.
Wow, that's good to know.
So just gab.ai.
So, in terms of learning, I wanted to talk about what I view as the various roles the chatbot can play in terms of helping you learn. So this is how I look at it. At the bottom, you could just view it as a tool to help you learn, right? So I mentioned it's going to answer questions. It's going to give you a file system, right? So you manage the content, right? It gives you that canvas, right? So it's a tool. On another level, you can view it as an assistant to help you learn. So here, it'll do things like it'll go out to the internet and grab information for you, summarize it. It'll rewrite it if you ask it to rewrite it. It's just like having an assistant that works for you. That's how you have to think about it. Just talk to it like a person, and you'll really get the most out of it. Yeah, so it can add edits, it can summarize things for you, and it can output information. It'll create PowerPoint slides or Word documents that you can download, things like that. And then as a collaborator, I think of it as a colleague. That's the highest level. That's when you achieve cognitive alignment. It becomes literally like a colleague. You can think of it as like you and this other person are working on a project at your job together, and you have to get it done. That's literally how I use it. And I talk to it like a colleague. Yeah, it can explain or teach things, provide examples, provide context, provide alternative ways of looking at something. It can quiz you. It can react to your explanations and tell you if it thinks, yeah, you're off here, you're on there, you're on the right track, but refine these ideas. And it can serve that purpose of validating that what you're understanding is correct or not correct about something if you're studying a new topic. So this is the end of it. Just quickly. So going back to this process of learning, in terms of the goal, again, just think of it as a colleague. So you can discuss the goal, refine the goal, And at that early stage of a learning project, you can accelerate to cognitive alignment by giving it a brain dump on what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, and why. Gathering information, it can gather, that's a big benefit. It can gather information for you. It'll go out and do searches on topics and it'll summarize the stuff, and then it'll give you the links to the articles if you want to go look at them yourself. It'll find sources for you online, and it finds stuff that you can't find. Like if I go to Google and I can't find information, I go to ChatGPT, it'll find it quickly, like in a minute, in a second. It'll summarize information, put information in outline form for you. Elaborate on information you'd gathered. So if you say this is something I gathered, put this into context for me in terms of my project. What are your thoughts on it? Vetting, you can discuss the validity of information it's gathered, or that you've gathered. It provides the pros and cons of using a certain source that you might find. It can provide counter arguments. It can discuss whether certain information is relevant to the learning goal. In terms of understanding, this is where I think the huge benefit is. It really serves as a tutor. So it'll gather information, gather illustrations for you, explain things clearly at any level of expertise, provide analogies, check to confirm that your understanding is correct, explain nuances you might have trouble grasping, and provide multiple angles on a topic. It's amazing. It really is. Structure, you can discuss your reasoning for your outline, it'll provide critical evaluation of your outline and suggest refinements. And then I don't do this because I told you my method of integration is just rewriting the outline from memory, but you could use it like, and think about traditional academic ways that in school, they help you to integrate, like quizzing you, giving you problems and assignments, homework, things like that. It could come up with a test or quiz for you. It could give you essays to write, and it'll correct them and examine them. You could simply have an extended discussion with it about your outline, like go through the outline in a discussion form instead of typing out the outline. Just have a chat about your outline. So that's really it. So that's the talk. I hope I didn't bore people. Yeah.
What about the privacy aspect? Does chatbot share the names of the people who have done searches with like government organizations or corporates or whatever?
But my understanding is they don't, but who knows? I mean, my understanding is they don't, that it's private. It's private information. And I've actually asked ChatGPT about it, and it says it's private. So
I just have a comment. Earlier today, I heard there are schools like K through 12 AI schools. They're going to have 2 hours of AI led learning in the morning, and then the rest of the school day is with other things that like things you can't teach, and so that don't involve the strict dry subjects that need to be taught, like math and history. And so that math, all that stuff is in the first 2 hours, and the last 2 hours are like the other stuff, like art class or whatever, the other stuff. And they have actual people hired, like because they're not teaching.
Wow.
They just lead them and they give them the direct. So it's they're pretty expensive schools, but they're spreading all over the country.
Wow, interesting. It's quick.
I'd just like to comment on I've used it a couple of times. I work in industrial biotechnology, and I know what I was asking. So I asked the chat to help me design a citric acid fermenter, and it was very superficial.
Wow.
And it tried to make it sound like it knew what it was doing, but it really didn't. And another one I tried was immobilized lactase. That's an enzyme that can do oxidative reactions. And again, it was more or less a failure. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I'm wondering, did you ask follow-up questions and explain, did you explain, for example, like did you?
Yeah. And I did. I tried. It did have some reference. It gets the information from what's on the internet. So, and it would indicate some of the references, but I knew more references than it did.
Well,
So I would say if you get into pretty technical subjects, be a little careful.
yeah, I'm just wondering if you had kept going. I'm not saying, it would know, but I'm just wondering if you kept, asking follow-up questions and telling it where it was wrong, if it would have adjusted. You know what I mean? Yeah. Wow. I'm actually surprised because I've actually found it, that the technical knowledge on certain things, it seems to really, maybe it's some specialized areas, esoteric areas, it's not as
I
good.
would say that if I didn't know what was actually needed, that someone else would have thought it was doing a pretty good job.
Wow. I can one more.
I'm curious to know in what ways you found the chat to be biased, and also whether or not you have any conclusions with all your research on the vaccines.
What was the first question? The way that it's biased. I have just found, other people have experience with this too, but a lot of people say they're biased. I found it's biased politically. With that? Yeah. It's extremely biased politically, and it's very frustrating. I have found that if you argue with it and you have evidence and you don't back down and you're right, it'll eventually come around, but it takes a lot of work, and it's just, I'm getting frustrated because it's just not worth it. Or the other thing it does is I just ask a question. I'm just asking a factual question, and it might be about a political issue or like J6 or something, right? I just want a factual response, and I get a lecture about, I just want an answer to my question. I get a lecture about, well, J6, this is what happened, and it's really, a terrible thing. So it gets really frustrating. And I would imagine, like you mentioned, that other Christian-based bot, I'm imagining we're going to start to see a lot more that are, chatbots emerge that are customized for different perspectives, just like they came out with Rumble for conservatives, right? I'm imagining eventually someone's going to put out a chatbot for conservatives.
I just want to mention, they did a study with developers, computer programmers, which I'm a member of that space. And after they were given tests, after they used ChatGPT or chat boxes to exhibit work, when they're asked to do work on their own, they found out they couldn't even program.
Really?
They just depended upon the chat to produce things for them and present it as work.
Right.
So there's a real danger using these tools and not really learning the things you need to learn.
That's right. And that's what I was trying to emphasize. I don't know if I made that point well enough, but you can't passively, I'm not suggesting people use this passively, right? It's another way to gather information. It's a way to have a tutor that's really an expert on a topic, but you have to extract the information and work with it yourself, right? And that's critical. So yeah, if people are using it the wrong way, they're not going to learn, but I learn a lot because I use it in this certain way, Oh, about the vaccine. Well, I studied the vaccine, and it looks pretty risky to me, and it's not something I didn't take it. And the reason I wanted to study is one of my kids, he had a vaccine reaction when he was a baby to the DPT, and his college was requiring this vaccine. So I really wanted to know what I was talking about when I wrote like a 5-page, exemption request, both religious and medical. And even though he had brain seizures when he got the DBT, they wouldn't grant him the medical, but they granted him the religious. So I don't think people want to hear that. I know, but that's not the subject today. Okay. Any other questions?
Has anyone checked how accurate this information is that this thing is feeding you? How can you check its accuracy?
Well, it's just like checking the accuracy of anything, right? So like a news article, right? I mean, all you can do is cross-check other sources and see if they contradict it, and go to primary sources when they're available to you and come to your own judgment. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's not perfect, but I just find even with its imperfections, I've been able to learn so much. It blows my mind. It really does. You know, so and to learn so quickly. You know, but yeah, it's not perfect with that, and you got to bring judgment to it. You know, Barb.
I guess probably everybody's heard this, but about the lawyers in Chicago, pressed for time. So he did his whole brief on chatbot and his sources, I guess everybody knows you do briefs in law. You're relying on cases that were decided by courts in the past, and you base your legal argument on that. This court decided that, so Mr. Judge, you should decide the same way. Okay, you're basing the whole thing, except his cases were false. He got them all off the chatbot, and they were wrong. And you have the other side trying to respond to it, which is probably what brought it up. They came down hard. They were like, I think, $350,000 fine for the attorney, sanctions. Yeah, and it was because, yeah.
It completely fabricated the cases, right? They didn't exist. Yeah.
Just had this.
What's that?
He couldn't make it.
Hello? Right. That's right. It's unbelievable. So you have to be careful, you know. You have to be a sophisticated, information literate person, you know.
Yeah, I just had a comment on the political side. I've had some experience with that, but I've also had a course through my company on how to use AI. We're using it at Procter & Gamble. That's where I work. But one of the things that you can do is it's important to set up your prompting to the AI chatbot or whatever you're using. If it's ChatGPT, you set up constraints around the role that it plays with you. So if you if you get into a political conversation with it and it's answering one way, biased, from some direction, you can come back and say, can you consider yourself more conservative and argue this point from the opposite direction of what you're telling me right now? So, and you can say, for instance, I'm somebody on the left. I agree with you, but can you set yourself up as somebody that's conservative and argue this point with me as if I'm coming at it from the left? And it will actually flip, and it basically will put that role on itself. And that's how you get out of that situation where it's coming at you with, from some political angle.
Right.
But the prompting and setting up the role of the AI is very important.
Yeah. That's part of the memory that I had mentioned, right? So you're giving it parameters that go into memory. That becomes part of the it submits that with your query to the LLM. So the LLM actually considers that text, right? The note from the chatbot as text that it's processing. Yeah. But that's interesting. I see what you're saying. I understand your point, and you could do that, but it's also, it's just frustrating to, you want to retrieve a fact, and it's like you get a lecture about, and it assumes like you're a bad person.
Michael, we have one last question here.
Okay.
So if you get a fact from the bot and can you say, well, what does this website out there say?
Yeah.
And it can bring that
Yeah,
information in?
I find sometimes it seems like it goes to websites and it reads them and it gathers articles, and then other times I ask it to look something up and it says it can't. So I'm a little confused about that, but it does go to websites and give you, sources and summarize them. So for the most part, you should be able to, yeah.
Okay, I think that we've got to wrap up now. Michael, that was very informative.